Imagine a nation that was handed everything it was ever promised. The land, cities it didn't build, vineyards it didn't plant. A whole generation that has personally watched a sea open and a river stand still and directly covenanted with God. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. This is what they were promised and given. And then imagine that same nation who still benefits from all those promises, 2 generations later, they're unable to recall the name of the God who did all of it. The book of Judges tells us it happened in the space of a single funeral. See, one generation of leaders is buried, and the very next thing the text says is that a new generation arose that knew not the Lord. Today, we're going to dig into how a memory gets lost that fast.
Light in the dark, standing in the storm. The Lord raised up a deliverer. Strength for the weak, a fire to keep us warm when we can't lift our heads any higher. He sets our hands and hearts on fire. The Lord raised up a deliverer, and He will again.
Welcome to Come Listen With Me. My name is Ricky Black, aka Elder Eleazar, and today is our Monday, May 25th reading in our ongoing Come Follow Me study of the Old Testament. And as we begin the book of Judges with chapters 2 and 3, these 2 chapters, they're the foundation that the whole book is really built on. I mean, chapter 2 hands us the blueprint, and then chapter 3 lays out the first stones on top of it. So today is, it's the first day this week in our sort of new experiment, right? It's going to be less of a walk through the verses that you've already read and more of a discussion on what those verses are doing, what they mean. So without further ado, let's just dig right in and get to work. All right, so let's start where chapter 2 wants us to start, which is a death. See, Joshua dies, and so do the elders who outlived him. So the men who had personally seen what the Lord did for Israel, all of them. And then comes one of the quietly devastating verses in the Old Testament. It's here in Judges 2, verse 10. It says, "And also all the generation were gathered unto their fathers, and there arose another generation after them, which knew not the Lord, nor yet the work which he had done for Israel." So look at the precision of that wording. It does not say that the new generation rebelled or argued or somehow rejected the Lord. It simply says that they didn't know him. And the Hebrew word yada is not a head knowledge, right? Like a fact in your head. Not knowing facts, that's not what we're talking about here. It's the knowing of a relationship or a first-hand acquaintance, right? So the grandparents had walked through the Jordan on dry ground. The grandchildren had merely heard a story about a river. So here's the lesson in the verse. See, faith is never automatically inherited. It is always one generation from being forgotten. It has to be handed over deliberately, person to person. And at the close of the Joshua era, somebody definitely dropped it. Now, if we back up to the start of the chapter in verses 1 through 3, which opens with a confrontation. See, the angel of the Lord comes up from Gilgal to a place called Bochim and delivers an indictment. He says, "I made you to go up out of Egypt, and I said, I will never break my covenant with you. But ye have not obeyed my voice, wherefore they shall be as thorns in your sides, and their gods shall be a snare unto you." So it's very direct, admonishing language. He doesn't say that the Lord brought you out of Egypt. He says, I made you go up out of Egypt. So first person, he's speaking as God, claiming the covenant as his own, which is why a long line of interpreters have read this messenger not as a created angel, but as a divine appearance, the premortal Jesus himself. And the specifics on the geography are important here too. See, Gilgal is the place of the fresh start, where Israel first camped after crossing the Jordan. So the angel travels from there to Bochim. That's a name on no older maps, right? Because the people, they coined it on the spot, right? It didn't have a name before them. And Bochim means weepers. So in one short journey, the nation has moved from the place of the fresh start to the place named for weeping. And what is the change? Well, it's not idol worship, not yet, right? It's something softer, and I think a little more convicting. See, they had made peace with the people of the land and failed to tear down the altars. That was the real nature of the harem language from the last book. And they didn't do it. They did not completely wipe out the influence of those other gods. So the sin at Bochim is not a dramatic act of rebellion. It's just an accommodation, right? The decision to let things be, to coexist with what should have been confronted. And the Lord names the consequence with exact surgical language: thorns and a snare. So not a sudden catastrophe, but a slow chafing, a hidden trap, right? Which is precisely how the rest of the book will play out. The people weep when they hear it, and they offer sacrifice. But hold that weeping loosely, right? Because the book quietly asks whether it was ever became anything more than that. See, tears are not the same thing as actual repentance or turning back towards the Lord. Okay. Now, in the middle of chapter 2 this really is the engine room of the book, right? Of where the narrator stops kind of telling a story and takes a moment to describe the pattern that we're about to see over and over and over again, right? And the pattern even has a fixed opening phrase. So these words, you're going to want to pay attention through this entire book, the book of Judges, because they're going to toll like a bell through the chapters ahead. And this is what we see in verse 11. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. So watch for that exact line, because again, it's the bell tolling to trigger the start of each cycle over and over again in that ever narrowing pattern. Because remember, it's not a circle, it's a tightening spiral as the cycles get faster and faster and faster. And the stages that follow, they're just as fixed. See, Israel does evil and then serves Baals and Asheroths and the storm gods and the fertility goddesses of Canaan. And the Lord hands them over to their enemies. They are brought low, they groan, he raises up a deliverer. There is a season of rest, and then the deliverer dies, and the people relapse, and the whole thing turns over again. So a couple of things that deserve looking at closer. First is a word. The figure that the Lord raises up is called in Hebrew a shofet. And we hear the English word judge, and we picture a courtroom or a bench giving, some sort of legal verdict. But we need to set that aside, because shofet here means something far closer to a champion, a vindicator, a deliverer, right? A hero of sorts. So this is a book about deliverance, not about litigation. And second, and this is where the theological heart of the book hits, right? Look at why the Lord acts. Now, the text says in verse 18, "For it repented the Lord because of their groanings by reason of them that oppressed them." So it does not say that the Lord acted because Israel repented. It says he acted because they groaned under the weight of the oppression. And he couldn't leave them in it. So the entire cycle, it runs on grace that arrives before the people even earned a single thing from the Lord. So Israel reliably supplies the failure, and God supplies the deliverer every single time. And one more observation. I know I said two. We're going to go for a third. And it's sobering. I've been calling this a cycle, but the cycle returns to you where you begin. This does not, right? Because like I said, it's a spiral. It's tightening. The text says each generation behaves worse than the one before it, right? So everything is just getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And it's more like a staircase. That spiral goes down, right? And every cycle takes you further down. So by the end of the book, Israel has sunk so low, it stops even crying out to the Lord altogether. Now, moving from chapter 2 into chapter 3. Chapter 3, it takes the machine and it runs 3 deliverers through it. And the useful thing to watch is how much room each one is given. See, Othniel is the first. He's handled in about 4 verses. See, Israel cries out, the Lord raises him up. And then in verse 10, we get, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. Now, he prevails, and the land has rest for 40 years. So that bit of brevity, again, it's deliberate, right? 40 years. Othniel is the pattern in its clean, undamaged form. No flaws, no troubling aftermath. And we're going to want to hold that first clean picture in mind, right? Because every next deliverer bends it badly out of shape, right? As we kind of take that tighter spiral on the way down. Because very quickly, again, we read in verse 15, "When the children of Israel cried unto the Lord raised him up a deliverer." And then we meet the second deliverer, Ehud, and he gets roughly 10 times the word count, and almost none of it is clean. All right, this account is by design dark and uncomfortably funny. Israel is oppressed by Eglon, king of Moab, and the deliverer raises up against him is a left-handed Benjamite. So the tribal name Benjamin means son of the right hand. So our deliverer is quite literally a left-handed son of the right hand. And again, the hinge of the whole plot, right, is that a right-handed man carries his sword on the left hip, right, exactly, so he can draw it. It's exactly where a guard would check. Ehud, he straps his blade on the right thigh, the side that goes unwatched, undetected. And so he gets it in, and he tells the king that he carries a secret message. And in this case, it's a Hebrew word for davar, right? It means both a word and a thing. So Ehud has a davar from God, and he is telling them the precise truth, technically the truth. He just simply admits that it is a 1.5 foot long piece of iron. And why tell a delivered story with this much grim comedy? It's because the comedy is actually theological. So the blade goes in, and the king's servants find the door locked and assume that the master is relieving himself. And they wait long enough to grow embarrassed. So while Ehud walks free and sounds the trumpet, like the whole apparatus of Moabite power is undone by one overlooked man with a hidden knife in a place that seems obvious but was overlooked, while the palace guards just stood outside because they were too polite to knock. So tyranny seen from heaven is not only evil, it is also faintly absurd, which you can kind of appreciate when the Lord portrays that in the scriptures. And then we get our third deliverer, right? Takes a single verse, right? Shamgar strikes down 600 Philistines with an ox goad, right? A farmer's cattle prod. It's not actually a weapon at all. So Othniel, clean and brief. Ehud, long and dark. Shamgar, footnote. So 3 deliverers, 3 wildly different word counts. And the whole unevenness itself helps with the message. Deliverance is real and repeated, but it's never going to look the same way twice. And why? Well, so let's bring these 2 chapters home with one question. The generation that forgot the Lord was not wicked in any cinematic way. They did not burn the law or curse the covenant. They were simply one handoff removed from the people who knew God directly. And the knowing did not make the jump for whatever reason. So the honest question that chapter 2, verse 10 presses on us is not whether we believe, whether we know, right, head knowledge. It's whether we are actively, handing it on, right, in language to someone younger or newer in a way that they can actually receive faith, right? Because faith is not absorbed from the furniture of a religious home, right? It's handed over on purpose with intent, where you help build that relationship with the Lord, or it is lost in a single generation because you can't take it for granted. It's also a good understanding that a lot of people were tied to some of these leaders. And so when the leaders left, that's when it fell away. So it reminds us that we can't continue to live as a covenant people off of somebody else's faith, right? Your testimony, your faith has to be your own. You have to have that personal relationship with God. And to the next generation, they're not going to live off of our faith and our knowledge of God. They need to build their own. They need their own witness, their own testimony in order to carry it on. And that's what we should be working to help them achieve. So here's something to think about through the day, right? Chapter 2, verse 10. Turns a memory that was never passed down. So do this. Sometime today, just take 5 minutes and write down one specific instance, recent and concrete, where you saw the Lord's hand in your own life. And I'm not talking about a general warm feeling, right? One particular thing with the details, with names, right? Something solid. And that short paragraph is exactly the kind of thing that bridges a generation. That the works of the Lord made specific enough that you could actually hand it to somebody else. And if you do it, tell me in the comments. And if you're comfortable with it, share what you've come up with in that moment with others, if possible with those of a younger generation. Help them to see the things in their own life where the Lord is working through them so they can build their own relationship. And I'd generally like to know where everyone lands on this one, because I think there's a lot of good testimony building that we can do here. Now, if chapter 2 has you thinking about a whole people could quietly forget their God, Our companion deep dive this week goes deeper into the ground beneath the reading. It's going to come up in a couple of days here, but be ready for it, right? Because, again, it's going to be the Song of Deborah in Judges chapter 5. It's the great victory poem, right, that the curriculum sets aside, but we're going to dig in on a deep dive. It also happens to be one of the oldest pieces of Hebrew poetry that has survived to us. Anyway, be looking forward to that, but also make sure that you're reading to be prepared for when it comes. Now, tomorrow we're going to move into Judges chapter 4. And the book hands us its one figure called both prophetess and judge, which is Deborah, holding court under her palm tree, and Barak, who will not march without her. And probably the strangest deliverance in the book, which ends not on a battlefield, but inside a tent with a woman, a hammer, and a single wooden tent peg. Now, this week's study is also paired with the original song, The Lord Raised Up a Deliverer. Again, it's linked in the description. And if today's chapter showed how far Israel fell, the song carries the other half of that truth, that the falling was never meant to be the end. So give it a listen. Like I said, it's meant to pair with everything we're reading today, and it should only help complement your study and help kind of reinforce some of that into your mind. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. I'll see you back here tomorrow, and until then, as always, I appreciate you all, and thank you for choosing to spend some of your precious time to come listen with me.
And hearts on fire, the Lord raised up a deliverer.